Welcome. Every year we celebrate the birthday and the legacy of Martin Luther King. As you may know, Martin Luther King came to Boston University in 1951 to pursue the study of ethics and philosophy. He became Dr. King after earning his PhD here in our university about 60 years ago. Indeed, Boston University, the medical school and Boston Medical Center have a courageous history of shattering racial, ethnic, and gender barriers. The first African-American female physician in the United States, Rebecca Lee, went to school right here on this campus in a predecessor institution, the New England Female Medical College, which then became our medical school. And Charles Eastman, the first Native American to become a physician, graduated from Boston University School of Medicine in the year 1890. Certainly groundbreaking. We have a building not far from here named after the son of a free slave, Salomon Carter Fuller, who became the first African-American psychiatrist and who is also one of our graduates. The founding dean of the Morehouse School of Medicine and former Secretary of State, Louis Sullivan, became a physician here at Boston University. And I am particularly proud of having trained in anesthesiology at this hospital in a program led by Marcelle Willock, who is here today, who is the first woman of color to chair an academic clinical department in this country. Today, Boston Medical Center and Boston University School of Medicine are led by two remarkable women. Undoubtedly, our medical school has a rich tradition of diversity and inclusion. We preserve the legacy of MLK, our greatest alumnus, in many ways. The BU Library houses the priceless collection of Dr. King's personal papers, letters, and other documents. And on Marsh Plaza, in front of the University Chapel, you can read his famous words inscribed on the base of a monument dedicated to him, "Free at last, free at last." And every year we commemorate his birthday with activities such as this one. The medical campus and Boston Medical Center are in concert with Dr. King's aspirations, as we are committed to hearing all voices and all viewpoints. And we strive to provide the best education and healthcare to everyone without exception. We enjoy an environment of inclusion and we celebrate our differences. Sadly, though, our dedication to pluralism is not universal across the United States and is non-existent in many parts of the world. Martin Luther King's dream remains elusive, and today, almost 50 years after his death, there's travel from Ferguson to New York and from Paris to Nigeria. Last year, on this occasion, Rabin Davidoff, our Chief Medical Officer, spoke about growing up in apartheid South Africa and discussed how Nelson Mandela and MLK impacted his career and his views on social justice. The year before, Marcelle Willock spoke about her experiences marching with Dr. King and the challenges faced by ethnic minorities and women in academic medicine in the early 60s. Today, we're fortunate to have Dr. Kermit A. Crawford presenting his thoughts on the significance of Martin Luther King's life and what remains to be done to materialize his ideals. Dr. Crawford is an expert on culturally competent practices in mental health. He's a forensic psychologist and an associate professor of psychiatry in our medical school. He's the executive director of the Massachusetts Marathon Bombing Victims and Survivors Resiliency Center, as well as the director of our Center for Multicultural Health. He has provided leadership across the nation in the aftermath of disasters ranging from 9/11 to the marathon bombing here in Boston. Dr. Crawford has been honored with a doctorate degree from Boston College and a doctoral degree of Humane Letters from Massachusetts School of Professional Psychology, and he's published a variety of peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. Dr. Crawford has also made innumerable presentations on cultural competency across the country and for many national organizations. So let's give Kermit a warm round of applause.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It is such an honor to be here. As Dr. Ortega said, I've spoken around the nation on a number of different topics. I've spoken at congressional breakfasts, I've spoken at many universities, but there's something special about speaking at your home university. There's something special about speaking where you work. And I'm very honored to be here and thankful to Dr. Ortega for asking me. Thankful to the support I've gotten from Dean Karen Antman and also from President Kate Walsh and many of you over the time that I've been here. I also want to thank Dr. Reverend Davidoff because of the wonderful things that he said last year in talking and carrying us through his evolution as a person through the multiple contradictions that he had to deal with in apartheid South Africa, to the person that he is today and to the people that he's helping. This is a part of the legacy that we all stand on. Now there were a couple of things about this, because when I talked with Dr. Ortega, I'll keep up with time in the next 30 minutes or so. When I talked with Dr. Ortega, I was asking, so how many folks you think are going to be there? And he said, well, there's going to be some medical students and a few of my best friends. And then as I started walking across campus, it's like people were stopping me, Kermit, I can't wait to hear what you got to say. Kermit, I'll be there tomorrow. Kermit. And I was like, huh, what, you know? And then I come here and I see all of you and I say, you know something, when I grow up, Dr. Ortega, I want to be like you, because I want a few of my best friends, okay? The other thing about this is that there are, if you look on Google, and many of us researchers do, there are 160 million results when you look up the word Martin Luther King. 160 million. And you take, even in consideration the redundancies are there, it's going to be well over 100 million. And Dr. Ortega asked me to do this in 30 minutes. But you know what? I can do it. I can do this. So I should just plan to get started and talking about several things. Let's start with the facts. Okay, the facts are that we are talking about this man, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We recognize and celebrate his birthday on January 15th, the third Monday of each January is the holiday. He would be 86 years old today had he lived. He was killed by an assassin's bullet in 1968. The first holiday was celebrated in 1986, or it first became law, in 1986. Although it was signed as a proclamation and enacted in 1983 by then President Ronald Reagan. The first state, anybody know the first state that celebrated Martin Luther King Day? Arizona. Now, the next question y'all should know, what was the last state to celebrate in the year 2000? It was New Hampshire, right next door. Now, I'm director of the Center for Multicultural Mental Health, as Dr. Ortega said. And in that regard, I'm more attuned to talking about things like the Big 8 of diversity, those social identifiers such as ability, age, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, religion, sexual orientation, and race. But today, I'm going to talk about race. Today, my focus is going to be on this thing that is a social construction. Race is something that we give meaning to. There is no genotypical evidence of race, because there's more within group difference across the world than there are between group differences. But that fabrication, that social construct of race, has real world consequences for those who are so designated. This is a fundamental, a part of the foundation of my understanding of the greatness of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think it's also important for us to understand this, to understand the legacy and the lessons from Birmingham through to Ferguson, but not just Ferguson, to New York City, to Mount Pleasant, New York, to Cleveland, to Orlando, to Dayton, Ohio, to many other places that won't even be named today. When I think about speaking, I want to speak from the heart. And there's so much of Dr. Crawford in me that I forget Kermit. So a lot of times I go out and I find Dr. Crawford, or he finds me. And I find myself talking too much from the head. This search was much more meaningful for me. So I had to go in search of the heart. And I happened to be at the National Multicultural Summit over this past week in Atlanta, Georgia. So where do you go to find the heart? Where did I go to find the heart? I went to the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. It is quite an impressive experience, and all of these pictures are taken from there with the exception of the wagon which carried the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's body, which is in the new Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C. But all the rest of those things are there, including the tomb that holds the body of Coretta Scott King and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Now I'm walking around, I am so inspired. If you go, you'll understand what I'm talking about. You probably had that type of experience before. That all these things that I saw, all the news footage that I saw for so many years, all the memorabilia that I saw, my legs, honestly, were weak. And I was so energized by it, but also so troubled because I was waiting for the message. I walked around for a while, and it wasn't coming. And I was determined for this presentation that I wasn't going to stay in my head. You're not going to hear any theory today. You're not going to hear any sophisticated concepts. You're not going to hear any sophisticated analysis. These statistical analysis, this is not the time for that. So I don't want to just speak to your head. I want to speak to something inside of you too. You look around, you walk around for inspiration. And it didn't come. So, like many of us, when we look around for things for a while, we have to go to the bathroom. So I decided I gotta go. And I walked to the bathroom and I passed by these doors. And if any of you can see, they have whites only and color. Didn't mean much to me walking in. The men's room was right here. That is the door to the men's room. And the women's restroom was right there. So I went in. And then I came out again, and there was a young lady standing there. She had to be in her 20s. And she said something that really sort of shook me to my core. Because she was saying, and these are quotes, and I asked her if I could use this. Until you see it, it does not resonate. She was looking at these doors. I had passed by the doors. It didn't resonate to me. But I have lived the experiences that I'm going to talk about. And I thought that it is so far down in the recesses of my memory, so painful, that I didn't even deal with that. But Dr. Crawford, who is privileged, has the luxury of not dealing with that. Kermit does not have the luxury of not dealing with that. And she brought me back to Kermit. These are the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Being a Negro in America is not a comfortable existence. It means being in the company of the battered, the bruised, the scarred, and the defeated. It means trying to smile when you want to cry. It means trying to hold on to physical life amid psychological death. It means the pain of watching your children grow up with clouds of inferiority in their mental skies, having your legs cut off, then being condemned for being crippled. It means harried by day and haunted by night, by a nagging sense of nobodiness. It means the ache and anguish of living in so many situations where hope, unborn, have died, hopes unborn have died. This brought me back to where I came from. I'm from North Carolina. I was born in Georgia. I was raised in North Carolina. Although I haven't seen everything that I'm going to show you in these next few slides, I've seen representations of everything. I grew up with representations of everything. I came out of an existence where in Snow Hill, North Carolina, a little town, 1,500 people, in eastern North Carolina, even until today, there's a clear line between the black section of town and the white section of town. And in the black section of town, before integration, we were all at the black school, predominant black school. At the beginning of the year, we started 1 week after because we would get the first and second editions of books when the white schools had the third editions of books. We would have to, during the first week, fix the desks that we got from the white schools so that we could have enough desks. And it went on and on and on. And I said something earlier on, especially for those of you who know what privilege is, that I'm privileged. And you say, well, you're black. How can you be privileged? I grew up, my dad was the principal of that high school. And my mom was a teacher there at that high school. And when integration happened in 67 and 68, I went to the predominantly white school. And then the black school closed in 1970. And my dad lost his job. He became a teacher after that. So all of these things that you're going to see are things that I lived through and had to live with. Now, this is one person's story. I'm sure other people had much better experiences. But this is what I had to grow through, because when I came to New England, my world literally was black and white. And there are so many more colors in the rainbow. There are so many more people and differences that I didn't even realize, because my view is like this. If I can do anything today, I want to ask you not to keep your view like that, but to understand that there's so much that you don't even know, you don't even know, you don't know yet. Jim Crow. Jim Crow came from a ragtime song, but it was associated with the minstrel. Minstrels were, at that time, white people who dressed and ran around in blackface dancing. And it somehow became to symbolize the laws that were the segregation laws in the South and in other parts of the nation, but primarily in the South. Every sign up here, if I haven't seen, I've seen a representation. I remember going to restaurants and having to go to the rear. I remember not being able to stop in certain restaurants. I remember in not being able to drink out of the same fountains that whites drank out of. And in fact, this is one of the more liberal examples, because usually they'd have our fountain through the wall someplace else, where whites, when they were drinking, wouldn't even have to look at us. This is the worldview that I grew up with. Colored in the rear, not served, and the symbol of a lot of that, the Dixie flag. I don't have an issue with the Dixie flag. It's the symbolism, it's what it's associated with that scares me still today. I grew up with lynching. Out of the 4,000 plus folks that are documented as having been lynched in this nation, over 3,000 were black, primarily black men. In North Carolina, I decided to look up to see when the last lynching occurred. It didn't necessarily give me that data, but it gave me something a little more disturbing, because there were 98 people lynched in North Carolina in one county up through 1968. But there's a suspected lynching of a black man that happened last September. A gentleman who was lynched. He was found hanging with a lot of suspicion around different shoes on, how could he have hung himself like that? But the one common element that most everyone talked about is that his girlfriend, and he was 17 and in high school, a star football player. His girlfriend was white, and she was 31 years old. And in this county, in Bladenboro, is an active chapter of the Ku Klux Klan. But these are the images that I grew up with. This is Emmett Till. He was a young black boy, 14 years old. He was from Chicago, went down to Mississippi, to Muddy, Mississippi. And he's a person who, they saw race differently. They interacted with whites differently in Chicago. But he went down and he whistled at a white woman who owned a store there. And by night, he was taken out of his home. His eyes were gouged out. He was beaten multiple times. And he was weighted with an industrial fan and thrown into the Tallahatchie River. And they found him, and then they buried him a little over a week later. And this is Emmett Till. So many horror stories like that. Trauma, intergenerationally transmitted. Then there's the Ku Klux Klan. I have seen rallies. We drive by between Snow Hill and Rocky Mountain. And if I was driving with my mother, she said, "Son, get down on the back floor." If I was driving with my dad would go another way. But I went by rallies and saw crosses burning. And all these symbols, including this one, in Smithfield, North Carolina. The sign was taken down in 1977. There was another sign erected that said this in another part of North Carolina, not too far away, that was up in 2012 to let us know where we were and that we lived under this reign of terror. And then there were the images. The minstrel, the porter, the uncle, the shiftless and lazy moocher, Watermelon, the mammy, and Aunt Jemima. And this is kind of an upgrade, supposedly, of it, but the stereotype is still there. And the stereotype is everywhere. Pot calling the kettle black. The bad guy wears a black hat or rides a black horse. So many, black as the color of mourning. Black. And then I was thinking, okay, well, we did have Black Friday, that's a good thing. But then we have Black Friday, and then they put it with Black Monday, which is a bad thing. So the images are there. These are the things that, in order to become who I am today, I had to somehow work through. And I know many of the people that are back in my hometown are still back with these things. And one of the things, one of the people that helped us do this is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who told us,
we are able to say to ourselves now that we do count. And I want to say to everybody under the sound of my voice this afternoon that you are somebody. Don't let anybody make you feel that you are nobody. You are somebody, you have dignity, you have worth. Don't be ashamed of yourself, and don't be ashamed of your heritage. Don't be ashamed of your color. Don't be ashamed of your hair. I am black and beautiful, and not ashamed to say it.
We needed those words because there were so many people around that told us that we weren't. There's so many people around that told us we should be ashamed of who we are. And then when you see a lot of the violence that happens in the black community, it's a vestige, many of us think, of self-hate, of institutionalized self-hate. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But there's another thing that, even after that, I think is important for us to talk about. Even though we started with the images, even though we started with the reign of terror, even though we started with all these people telling us that we were not worth anything, even though we started in this country being 3/4 of a human, being an infrahuman, being an animal, according to the Constitution of this nation and the laws of this nation, still, we have to work through that. It is so easy to just become depressed and throw your hands up or make excuses for, well, this ain't gonna change, or any of those things. But we can start there, but we can't stay there. And I think, again, the words of Martin Luther King are instructive.
We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our body is heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
I can't hear those words today and not be touched. Not be touched that somebody cared this much to say these things against all the institutions that were there designed to keep us from saying this to each other, to hold us back. And then there's a time that I realized that for all of us, for all of the big eight of diversity that I talked about earlier, that my freedom is inextricably linked to your freedom. That a lot of what came out of the civil rights movement, and maybe even a little bit further back, maybe starting with suffrage, has brought all of us to a better state. But we understand that we can start here, but we're not able to stay here, especially when we think about indicators such as incarceration, underemployment of black people, undereducation of blacks, the mortality and morbidity rates, housing and home ownership, accumulation and intergenerational transfer of wealth. Every indicator that I just mentioned is on the downside for people who look like me. And there's one other. And in the public shootings and brutality. Looking at the statistics, and they aren't good statistics. In fact, in order to find some of the best, you go to a publication such as Mother Jones Journal. But according to Mother Jones Journal, between 2006 and 2012, 96 black people were killed each year. And if you look at the specific statistics, like for example, in New York City, there were 22 blacks. This would have been 12 or 13, I can't remember the year. But 22 blacks were shot, 7 fatalities. Compared to whites, 5 were shot with 3 fatalities. The worst offenders across the nation in terms of police violence, police brutality against black people, primarily black men, which have led some to say that black men are an endangered species. The worst offenders are New York City, Las Vegas, Nevada, in San Diego, California. Amadou Diallo, New York City, shot 41 times, 1999, pulling the wallet out of his pocket, unarmed, by police. DJ Henry from Easton, Massachusetts, shot in Mount Pleasant, New York, football player, Pace University, shot by a police officer, killed, unarmed. Trayvon Martin was not shot by a police officer. But maybe it's part of that institutional system that I talked about. Maybe it's a part of a system or a force, a systemic force, or a systemic process that leads to the same thing. In psychology, we talk about tridiagnosis, where you'll see two different things, but they're related to a third. And maybe that system is what we need to fix now. Michael Brown, shot in Ferguson, unarmed, 6 times, killed. Eric Garner, chokehold, death, Staten Island, New York. John Crawford III, shot in a Walmart store, walking along because he bought a BB gun for a relative. He was going to buy a BB gun for a relative. He was shot and killed. And Tamir Rice, 12-year-old with a pellet gun, shot and killed in Cleveland when the police drove up and saw him, didn't give him a chance, yelled as they were driving up and shot him to death. Now, in some ways, what I've shown you is a perpetration, because the reality looks like this. All of these people on this picture were shot and killed by police. I don't have the answer, because if I had the answer, I would have done something about this. And God knows that if I had a magic wand, I would have waved it by now. Equality would be the rule of the land. From marriage to housing to jobs to across the board. No one would have privilege until everyone had privilege. And that reminds me of what the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. But I don't have the studies to do that. I don't have the magic wand to be able to wave. But maybe I can use my privilege to make a difference, to keep these pictures from having to reoccur again and again and again. Maybe I can say from this platform, and 30 minutes, it's not time to change a whole lot, but maybe one of you can pick something up. Because if there is an institutionalized force, if it is an institutionalized process that enables this to occur, then we got to stop. Then we've got to put this somehow in check. Now, it's been called institutionalized racism. It's been called white supremacy. I'm not going there, because I think those terms are divisive. Because those same terms, the same process that affects me affects you too with injustice. But I know it's there. I know it's there because at the Harvard School, Dr. Banaji and Dr. Greenwald recently conducted a study. It was with the the implicit association test. And they found in this study that we all have bias, if the test is an accurate, a valid indicator. That we all have bias. I'm biased. I have biases. But every one of you does as well, individually. What do we do about it? Because if I already see black as the pot calling the kettle, or the image of Willie Horton, for those of you who are around here in Massachusetts when it was used politically. If I see black in that way, if I see black as somehow foreboding, then before I even ask a question, my automatic response is going to be to shoot. Until that is put in check, that we have to talk about that we have to be active, we have to show activism. We have to use our privilege to make a difference for people who can't speak for themselves. We have to acknowledge that. But we have to ask others to acknowledge it. But I first say that when I point my finger at somebody else, I realize that 3 are pointed back at me, like the cliche says. And in that regard, I feel like I have to do something. Oh, and by the way, I am a black male too. And oh, by the way, my wife who's here, we have 2 black male sons. And I'm concerned about them and I pray for them every day. Because I don't want them to be on this board, but I know they can too, just like I can. There's no difference here in me except by the grace of God, I go. I hope you'll join me in that. I hope you'll join me in that and also hear the other words, because I feel as if we all have to show courage in this. I feel that we all have to question our bias and talk to others about their biases. I feel that we have to talk about this institutional force or process that enables so many people with so much impunity to kill other people. Black lives matter, but you know what? Every life matters. And we have to assert that reality or assert that belief. We are doctors. We are nurses. We are interns, residents. We are deans. Are we using the privilege that we have to make a difference in the lives of these people so that they can keep life? Or are we using the privilege that we have to sit back on our laurels and say, look how I made it. I came out of Snow Hill, North Carolina. I couldn't see Dr. Crawford when I grew up. I didn't know anything about Boston University. I knew about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And it's because people cared. And not just black folks. It was white people. I was drafted into the Army the day before the draft ended. And I was thinking about making the Army a career. And then a white sergeant that didn't even know me. And it was a kind of different, it was insulting in a way, but it wasn't. Because he said, Crawford, you're not like the rest of these, meaning blacks. He said, you don't need to re-enlist. You need to go to school. And you need to make a difference. That he was an angel in my life. But let's see if we can't represent angels in other people's lives in that way. And again, with the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
And on some positions, Howard is asked, the question, is it safe? Expediency asks, the question, is it politic? Vanity asks, the question, is it popular? But conscience asks, the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, not politic, not popular, but he must do it because conscience tells him it is right. And that is where I stand today, and that is where I hope you will continue to stand, so that we can speed up the day when justice will roll down like waters all over the world, and righteousness like a mighty stream.
The words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., February 6, 1968. A proper sense of priorities. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Kermit. It's a difficult job to be the MLK speaker every year, so thank you for stepping up to the plate. Wonderful. You know, Coretta Scott King, MLK's wife, went to school here in the New England Conservatory of Music. She was a voice and violin major, graduating with honors from that institution, and it was while she was going to school here that they met. And Dr. King was a music lover. Coretta had other qualities as well. She was a beautiful woman. You know, one of the most powerful legacies that we have inherited from the African American tradition in the United States is their music. And today we would like to close our eyes and enjoy this piece, which dates back from the times of slavery. It was sung by Marian Anderson, Odetta, and many other of Dr. King's associates. And it's a very powerful and very appropriate piece to follow Kermit Crawford's words, Motherless Child, sung by Dina Jerome, one of our patients.